So there I was, standing barefoot on my porch, coffee in one hand, rifle in the other, wondering why the HOA president from 3 miles down the mountain had just called the cops, claiming I was committing an act of domestic terrorism with a campfire that I built on my own private land. That's when I knew this wasn't just petty. This was war. Let me rewind a little, because I swear to you, I wasn't doing anything even remotely controversial. I'm just a guy who spent most of his adult life dealing with actual problems, overseas, under pressure, dodging bullets that weren't metaphorical. So when I finally decided to retire early and buy myself a remote patch of forested heaven, I thought I'd earned the right to some peace and quiet. I bought a cabin tucked way up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Real remote stuff. No paved roads, no cell phone signal unless you stand on one particular rock, and the only people around are wild turkeys and the occasional neighbor with the same love for isolation. You know, bliss. I picked that spot specifically because it wasn't part of any homeowners association. That was the whole point. I didn't want someone knocking on my door to tell me my porch light was too bright or my mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. I wanted to build a fire pit, roast marshmallows, and teach the occasional rifle safety class to fellow veterans without anyone breathing down my neck. And for a while, that's exactly what I did. Enter Cheryl. Oh, Cheryl. A woman who somehow managed to turn passive aggression into a full-time performance art. She was the self-declared queen of an HOA 3 miles down the mountain in a development called Whispering Pines, which, I later learned, was neither whispery nor particularly piney. Cheryl had the kind of voice that could strip paint off a barn, and a moral superiority complex big enough to qualify for its own zip code. I first met her when she drove up to my cabin, uninvited, because she just wanted to have a little chat about the smoke. I assumed she meant metaphorically, like maybe she had beef. Turns out she meant literal smoke. From a perfectly legal, totally under control, and fully permitted campfire I had going for hot dogs. You know, she said, stepping out of her pristine white SUV like it was a spaceship landing on hostile alien terrain, a lot of us down the ridge are concerned about the pollution this fire is creating. I blinked at her, looked over at the barely smoldering campfire ring, then back at her. Pollution? I asked. Ma'am, that's 3 sticks and some pine cones. I've seen steam from a coffee mug make more of a statement. That did not go over well. She informed me, in that voice that's half PTA president, half Bond villain, that she was the president of the HOA and that all property owners in the surrounding area were expected to abide by community standards. I told her, politely at first, that I was not part of her community, her HOA, or her imagination. I even showed her the deed, which clearly stated my land was unincorporated and outside the HOA's jurisdiction. She squinted at it like I was showing her a crayon drawing, then told me, and I quote, "We'll see about that." At first, I figured that was the end of it. Just another overzealous control freak, who got bored of policing mailbox heights and needed a new project. But then the emails started. The first one was titled, Formal Notice of Violation. I opened it expecting spam, maybe a phishing scam, but no, it was from Cheryl. She had attached what looked like an HOA violation ticket for unauthorized fire activity and discharging firearms within community proximity. I laughed. Out loud. There wasn't a single thing on that ticket that applied to me. I screenshotted it, added a watermark that said, "Nice try," in Comic Sans, and sent it back with a meme of Judge Judy rolling her eyes. The second email was less formal and more unhinged. She accused me of endangering lives, setting a bad example, and sowing chaos into a peaceful neighborhood. My peaceful neighborhood is 3 miles of trees and dirt road, but sure. I responded with a quote from the U.S. Constitution and a gif of Captain America saluting. That probably didn't help. A few days later, one of my veteran buddies came up for a weekend. We grilled steaks, shot targets in a secured clearing, and camped out. Completely normal stuff for the woods. But when I went to town the next day to get supplies, the hardware store guy gave me a look and said, "Heard you're causing quite the stir down in Whispering Pines." Apparently, Cheryl had held a community meeting to warn her residents about the militia compound on the mountain. She told them I was arming unstable individuals, running unsanctioned combat training, and preparing for something she called a sovereign citizen-style siege. I nearly choked on my coffee when I heard that. She even tried to rally her HOA board to contact the county and see if they could annex my property under some obscure nuisance ordinance. When that didn't work, she went full Karen. The day she called 911 was the last straw. I was teaching a class, again, legally permitted, with liability waivers and everything. We had 2 benches, eye and ear protection, and even paper targets with safety zones marked. You'd think we were training Boy Scouts. Cheryl must have been watching from somewhere in the woods because the sheriff showed up about 40 minutes in, lights flashing, asking if everything was okay. To his credit, Sheriff McCully was cool about it. He'd been up to my place before, had coffee with me, knew I wasn't some lunatic prepping for civil war. He even said, "Sorry, man. Got a call about an armed extremist camp. Figured it was you again." We laughed. Cheryl did not. She was standing just out of view, phone in hand, still talking to dispatch, even as McCully walked over to her. I heard her screech something about fire hazards and domestic threats. That's when the sheriff told her, point blank, that she was trespassing and that she needed to leave before she was the one getting cited. She left, but not before shouting that she would be contacting the regional HOA alliance. Whatever that meant. By this point, I should have felt victorious. She was humiliated, the law was on my side, and my hot dogs didn't even get cold. But something about the way she said it, like she had one more move, one last card to play, stuck with me. I thought this was just one nosy neighbor overstepping boundaries, but it turns out Cheryl wasn't acting alone. Because the next morning, I woke up to a drone hovering over my property. And this one wasn't hers. It had a camera, a zoom lens, and a sticker with the Whispering Pines HOA logo printed on the side. That's when I realized, this wasn't just personal. This was organized. The moment I saw that drone buzzing over my treeline, I knew this was no longer just a Cheryl problem. Cheryl was just the mouthpiece, the human embodiment of every overreaching policy and rulebook nobody asked for. But now, with that HOA-branded drone peeking through my windows like some suburban surveillance pigeon, it was clear she had rallied the board. Or worse, convinced a whole army of HOA Karens that my cabin was their battlefield. I stood there for a minute, coffee still warm in my hand, watching the drone hover like it was daring me to wave. I didn't wave. I grabbed my camera and filmed it. Let them know I could play their little game too. That evening, I received another email, this time not from Cheryl directly but from something called the Whispering Pines Joint Security Task Force. Now, I'm a pretty calm guy, spend enough time in hot zones to recognize when someone's bluffing versus when they're about to escalate, but even I had to take a minute to reread that name. A security task force, run by an HOA, 3 miles away. The email was full of official-sounding nonsense. Phrases like community buffer zone, extended jurisdictional concern, and potential threat to neighborhood tranquility. They demanded that I cease all fire-related activity, suspend firearms demonstrations, and submit a written statement of compliance. I couldn't help but laugh. Not just a chuckle. A full-blown, doubled-over, wipe tears from my eyes laugh. Now I'm not the kind of man who throws gasoline on a fire just for fun. But I'm also not the type to back down when some self-important neighborhood council tries to turn my legal homestead into their personal control fantasy. I wrote back a single line. I do not negotiate with HOA terrorists. Then I went outside and lit another campfire. That night, I grilled the biggest, juiciest steak I could find, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and let the smoke rise high into the sky like a beacon of lawful defiance. The next day, they called the cop. Again. Same sheriff, different excuse. This time, Cheryl had reported suspicious smoke and the sound of multiple discharges. She made it sound like I was lobbing mortars at her development. Macaulay showed up just as I was teaching a basic field strip lesson with a couple of ex-military buddies. We weren't even firing anything, just explaining components and cleaning technique. Macaulay pulled up, shook his head, and said, "Let me guess. Cheryl." "Bingo," I said, handing him a fresh cup of coffee. He didn't even ask to see the paperwork anymore. He'd been through it. Permits, insurance, safety zones, the works. All ironclad. He just sat down on the porch, sipped the coffee, and told me Cheryl had called the county commissioner this time. Said I was a rogue trainer starting a private militia. I asked him if she was serious. He said, "Oh, she's serious. She's dead serious." She sent the commissioner a packet with satellite photos, screenshots of your Facebook posts, and a printed-out map of your property with red marker circles like she was prepping for a SEAL team raid. That image alone nearly made me spit my coffee. Facebook? I hadn't posted anything on Facebook since 2016. She had to be digging deep to build a case that flimsy. That evening, Cheryl tried to show up again. This time, she didn't even come alone. She brought 2 HOA board members. They parked at the bottom of my drive, stood at the edge of the tree line, and shouted like they were rallying townsfolk against Frankenstein's monster. They had clipboards, as if they were about to perform an audit on the wilderness. "We're here to perform a visual inspection of the area in light of recent safety concerns," Cheryl called out. I yelled back, "This isn't a cul-de-sac, Cheryl. It's private property. You're trespassing." Again. One of the guys with her, short dude, khakis, tucked in polo, stepped forward and said, "We have a right to ensure neighboring lands aren't compromising HOA peace." "Your rights stop at your HOA border," I said. "Which is 3 miles that way. You're not the UN." They didn't like that. Cheryl pulled out her phone again, no doubt preparing to call the cops for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. But she hesitated when Macaulay's cruiser appeared over the ridge, clearly already en route. He got out of the car, looked at them like they were weeds that needed trimming, and said, "Unless you folks got a warrant or a camping permit, you're going to want to turn around." That should have been the moment Cheryl backed off for good. But no. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched, and I swear I saw a vein bulge in her forehead. She pointed at me and shouted, "You're going to regret this. You can't just hide in the woods and play cowboy forever." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm living. Legally. On land I own. It's not my fault your HOA doesn't come with a map." They finally left, but the look on Cheryl's face said this wasn't over. Not even close. I went inside, grabbed a beer, and started drafting a letter to my lawyer. Not because I was worried about legal trouble. I was covered 6 ways from Sunday, but because something told me Cheryl was about to take things to a level no sane person would. And sure enough, I woke up the next morning to find my mailbox had been plastered with HOA flyers. Not inside it, mind you, on it. Wrapped in plastic, taped like some kind of reverse ransom note. They were laminated, printed in full color, and featured phrases like "protect our peace" and "say no to mountain militants." One of them had a heavily edited photo of me holding a rifle, cropped to look like I was yelling, even though I was just squinting into the sun. They passed these things out to every local within driving distance. A few of the other off-grid folks even brought me copies, laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. "I didn't know you were starting a war up here," one of them joked. "Can I get a t-shirt?" I took it in stride. For the most part. But when my realtor called and asked if I was planning to sell because she got an inquiry from the HOA about absorbing surrounding parcels, I realized Cheryl wasn't just trying to scare me off, she was trying to force me out. That's when I made the decision. If they wanted a villain, fine. I'd give them one. But not the kind that shows up unhinged and reckless. No. I was going to be surgical, legal, bulletproof. I'd make sure every single move was by the book. No loopholes, no cracks. And when I was done, They'd regret ever picking a fight with a guy who actually knows how to plan an op. But before I could get started, the plan changed. Because that night, after I set up a small fire for cooking and went inside to grab seasoning, I came back out to find the fire out and my firewood doused in what smelled suspiciously like bleach. And sitting right in the middle of the coals was a printed letter in a plastic sleeve. Signed, Whispering Pines Community Oversight Committee. Now it wasn't just threats. It wasn't just drama. They had trespassed, touched my property, tampered with my home. It was officially sabotage. I stared at that letter for a long time, the plastic sleeve crinkling in my hand as I turned it over like it might contain some secret code or hidden message. It didn't. Just the usual self-important, legally toothless jargon I'd come to expect from Whispering Pines. Phrases like, continued non-compliance will result in escalated action, and this is your final notice before civil steps are initiated. As if dousing my firewood in bleach wasn't already crossing a line. This wasn't a letter. It was a declaration. A very polite, laminated declaration of war. And I was done playing defense. They'd made a mistake. A big one. Because I'd spent the last few weeks absorbing every insult, every veiled threat, every passive-aggressive flyer, and compiling a case file thick enough to make a paralegal weep. I wasn't just mad anymore. I was focused. And I knew exactly how to make them eat their words without breaking a single law or lifting a single finger in anger. It was time to weaponize their worst fear. Legal, loud, and very public freedom. I started by contacting a few friends, fellow vets, off-grid types, even a few ex-law enforcement buddies, people who knew the line between freedom and foolishness and knew how to stay on the right side of it. I floated the idea of a little event. Just a gathering. Nothing fancy. Campfire cooking, some old-fashioned target practice with proper barriers and sound buffers, a few classes on wilderness safety, survival techniques, and yes, some rifle education. All permitted. All insured. All above board. I called it Campfire Freedom Fest, half as a joke and half as a challenge. The response? Overwhelming. Everyone loved the idea. Vets saw it as a great excuse to reconnect. Locals who had stayed quiet through the HOA mess suddenly started reaching out, offering to help, even donating supplies. One guy lent me a PA system. Another brought a smoker trailer big enough to feed 50 people. Someone even offered to sponsor t-shirts. Word spread fast, and within days I had an actual event forming. I filed for a public gathering permit with the county, had a fire marshal come out to inspect the site, and even gave the sheriff a heads up. He grinned when I told him, "Let me know when to show up. I'll bring chili." Now, you'd think any normal person, faced with overwhelming evidence that their campaign of intimidation had backfired, would back off. But Cheryl wasn't wired for retreat. When she caught wind of the event, she spiraled. She called the county clerk to question the validity of my permit. She posted on the Whispering Pines forum that I was organizing an anti-HOA resistance rally. She even tried to start a petition to have my event declared a threat to public safety. Only 10 people signed it. One of them was her cat, judging by the handwriting. The day of the event rolled around with a clear sky and a temperature just perfect enough to make it feel like nature was on my side. People showed up early. Veterans with fold-out chairs, families with coolers, and even a couple of elderly locals who brought cobbler and sat grinning at the chaos like it was a 4th of July parade. I had tables set up for safety demos, pamphlets about firearm responsibility, even a first aid tent. It wasn't just a party, it was a perfectly planned community event. And it was all legal. Then came the piece de resistance, the Freedom Fire. A massive, triple-ring fire pit built to code, inspected and cleared. We lit it at sundown, and the glow alone could have been seen from Whispering Pines with binoculars, which, of course, I was certain Cheryl was using. And right on cue, she appeared. She didn't come alone this time. She brought 2 board members and a man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as her attorney. They tried to serve me papers. I say tried, because the attorney hadn't actually filed anything with the court. Just a cease and desist letter printed off Google Docs, stuffed in an envelope, and written in language so vague it could have been about anything from noise complaints to witchcraft. I thanked him for the free stationery and handed it right back. That's when Cheryl lost it. She started yelling. Screaming, really. Something about environmental damage, mental distress, community standards, and, at one point, symbolic acts of aggression. I didn't even know what that meant. Was the chili too spicy? Were the t-shirts triggering? Whatever it was, she was losing control, and making sure everyone saw it. Unfortunately for her, one of my buddies was live-streaming the event for the folks who couldn't make it in person. That stream captured everything. Her yelling, her trying to block the camera, the crowd reacting with a mix of confusion and amusement. And then, the final act. While trying to storm her way into the central tent, Cheryl shoved one of the volunteers. Just enough to make the sheriff, who had been watching from the sidelines with a paper plate full of brisket, step in. He walked over slowly, like he was strolling through a park, and calmly asked her to step back. When she refused, still ranting about civilian militias and unauthorized grill smoke, he informed her she was trespassing and disturbing a lawful assembly. She argued. Loudly. Very loudly. Too loudly. And then he cuffed her. The crowd went dead silent for a second, followed by a ripple of stunned laughter, like everyone had been holding in the tension and now finally had permission to exhale. Cheryl was escorted to the cruiser, still yelling about legal action and community bylaws, as her HOA board members slunk away without another word. The sheriff took her downtown, filed a report, and let her go with a citation. But the damage had been done. Her meltdown had been broadcast live, clipped, re-uploaded, and shared across social media within hours. The next day, I got a message from a local news outlet. They wanted to run a story on the off-grid veteran who hosted a legal campfire festival and got an HOA president arrested. I declined the interview, but I did agree to send them footage. Not for fame. Not for glory. But because I knew that nothing kills a power-hungry tyrant faster than their own behavior being seen by the public. As for Cheryl, her HOA wasn't thrilled. A few of her board members quit the same week. An emergency meeting was called, and rumors started circulating that Whispering Pines was considering replacing her as president. Apparently, public humiliation wasn't in their bylaws. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because all the chaos, all the harassment, all the bleach-soaked firewood and drone flyovers, those had consequences. And now that Cheryl had given me everything I needed on camera, in writing, and on public record, I had one more card to play. I'd already begun the paperwork. The kind that didn't involve rifles or campfires. The kind that involved lawyers. The paperwork wasn't flashy. It didn't come with a parade or dramatic background music, but it was precise. And it had teeth. I hired a lawyer who specialized in nuisance and harassment cases, and I gave him everything. Every laminated threat, every cease and desist attempt, every police report, every video, even the drone footage with the HOA logo visible on the side. I made it clear I wasn't looking for a payout, I was looking for accountability. The kind that made people like Cheryl think twice before trying to annex freedom with a clipboard. My lawyer filed a harassment and trespassing complaint with the county, citing repeated attempts by Cheryl and her HOA to interfere with my legal property use. We backed it with video evidence, timestamps, and signed witness statements from other locals who'd seen her wander past property lines and try to stir up trouble. The drone footage helped too. There's nothing quite like aerial proof of coordinated HOA surveillance to wake up a county board that's been quietly ignoring a problem. Cheryl, it turned out, had been poking a bear while standing in a minefield. I also filed a formal complaint with the FAA. Turns out, flying a drone over someone's private land without permission, especially for surveillance purposes, comes with some heavy consequences, especially when it's tied to a broader harassment campaign. The complaint got flagged for investigation, and the HOA's little tech toy was officially grounded. When they got the letter informing them of the potential fines for unlicensed surveillance, I imagine Cheryl's head spun like that drone trying to find a GPS signal in the forest. Word got around fast. The very community Cheryl thought she was protecting started to shift. People weren't just embarrassed by her behavior anymore, they were angry. Some of them had invested real money into their homes, hoping for peace and order, not viral meltdowns and local scandal. Others were just tired of the drama. Several board members who had once backed her began resigning, quietly slipping out the back door of the organization she once ruled like a queen. A vote was called, an emergency election, and Cheryl, who had once claimed to be the face of order, was about to be voted out by the very people she insisted she represented. I didn't attend the HOA meeting where they finally booted her, but I got a play-by-play from a neighbor who did. Apparently, Cheryl tried to open with a PowerPoint presentation titled, "The Threat on the Ridge," which included heavily edited photos of me holding a rifle, zoomed in to the point of pixelation, and a dramatic slide with the words, "Protect Our Future," in bright red letters. Her voice cracked halfway through, and someone in the audience asked if they could just skip to the vote. The final tally wasn't even close, 9-1. The one, obviously, being Cheryl herself. That night, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from the newly elected HOA president apologizing on behalf of the entire board and offering a formal settlement for damages and legal costs. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to cover attorney fees and a little extra, but it came with something far more satisfying. An agreement that Whispering Pines would never again attempt to exert jurisdiction over my land. No more drones, no more letters, no more clipboard crusade. It was done. I could have taken the check, cashed it, and gone right back to grilling in peace. But I had a better idea. I used the settlement money to start a project I'd been dreaming about for a while. A small retreat for veterans. Nothing big, just a few cabins, some open land, and enough space to breathe without interference. A place for people who'd been through too much to be told how tall their grass should be. And I gave it a name I knew Cheryl would hate. Camp Cheryl's Freedom Ranch. I had the sign custom made, carved from oak with a smooth lacquer finish. The letters were bold and elegant, and underneath the name was a motto I came up with over a second cup of coffee. Respect is earned, not legislated. I posted a photo of it on my cabin's social page, the one I barely used, and within days it was getting shared by veterans groups and rural living forums like wildfire. Some people thought it was fake. Others wanted t-shirts. One guy even offered to franchise the idea, which I politely declined. A week later, I got a call from a local representative who'd seen the footage of Cheryl's arrest and the live streams of the event. He wanted to talk about potential legislation to limit HOA overreach into unincorporated land. I agreed to meet with him, mostly because I liked the irony. Cheryl had tried to shut me down with the law, and now the law was using her as a case study in what not to do. The meeting went well. He asked if I'd be willing to testify if a hearing came up. I said sure, as long as they let me bring coffee. He laughed and said that wouldn't be a problem. Things were quiet again after that. No more drones. No more flyers. Just the sound of trees swaying in the wind and the occasional pop from a fire pit when the logs settled just right. My porch became my sanctuary again, the way it was always meant to be. Every once in a while, I'd see a car drive slowly past the bottom of the trail, someone probably curious if the stories were true. I didn't mind. Let them wonder. The legend of the HOA that tried to bully a veteran off his own land had taken on a life of its own. One day I even caught a group of hikers taking selfies in front of the Camp Cheryl sign like it was some kind of tourist attraction. I waved from the porch and they waved back. One of them shouted, "You're a hero, man." I didn't correct them. Sometimes letting the myth grow is part of the fun. As for Cheryl, I heard she moved. Whispering Pines replaced her name on the community website and scrubbed every mention of the security task force. I imagine she still tells her side of the story somewhere, probably involving phrases like off-grid extremists and misinformation. But the rest of us knew the truth. She didn't lose to chaos. She lost to common sense, to the law, and to someone who refused to be pushed around by printed threats and power-tripping board members. I still keep the original, final notice flyer, the one they stuck to my mailbox. I laminated it, fitting, right? And framed it in my guest cabin. It always gets a laugh when people visit. A little reminder of how it started. Because how it ended. That part is much better. The porch is quiet again. Birds in the trees. Coffee on the table. Rifle in the case, right where it belongs. And if you stand just right and listen hard enough, you might hear the faintest echo of Cheryl's voice carrying through the pines, muttering about bylaws and buffer zones. But me? I just smile, take another sip, and think to myself, no traffic, no noise, no HOA. Just freedom.